Alright, hi everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of the torch slash flashlight tutorial. Let's take a look where we left off in the previous stream in part 1. So let's fire up our stream Examo little project here, and we'll take a quick review of that. Okay, what we had done previously was just adding that torch that's currently is just attached to your left hand, I believe. So if you press T, um, the torch turns on, and you can walk around with it and such. Press T again, it turns it off, and so on. Uh, so. Um, Today, I was planning on working on getting the flashlights. So let me show you how that looks. And let me jump into this test project here. And we'll take a quick peek at it. What I want to do for this part is get this flashlight working. And hopefully there's going to be a part 3 where we can get kind of the niceties in place. Like the particle effect, maybe that torch that I have. So yeah, let's see. Let's open this test level that I have here, and let me just go into a kind of a darker section of this level, and jumping into game mode, pressing T. Actually, not T, because that's just the tour. Actually, not. It should be the flashlight. So. There we go, let's see. There's flashlight. Maybe I need to recompile it because it's not really positioned well. So 1 second here. I made some changes to it, so let's see if we can get this up and working. I need to save it, so let's save the level here. And let's turn on the flashlight. There it is. So now the flashlight is attached to the head, I believe. Yeah, the neck bone. So if you can see, it kind of swings with the motion of the body. And if you look up, down to the side, it just follows where you look at. In this test project, I have some turning animations in place, and that they're not perfect. So if you can see, they're whenever you rotate it, they're a little bit too overdone. So but yeah, this is what I intend on having for today. So let's get to it. I'm just going to close this up real quick. Let's jump into our stream Mixamo directory here. Go and open our solution. And game solution, there we go. Alright, so first thing, let's actually create our components. So in that case, I'm just going to go here to attachment, and I'm going to add a new item. As always, make sure that you're in the proper directory when doing this. So let's browse to code, attachments, and select. So in here, I'm going to be creating a flashlight, and it's going to be a C++ file. And I'm also going to be adding another one. It's going to be a header file. And we already have the proper directory, so this is going to be flashlight and add. Okay, just like before, some of this is going to be a little bit of copying and pasting and going through some of the code because, like I said, it's just a standard code from the Cryengine repo. I'm gonna go over some of the things that I've done to kind of trim it down and remove some of the unneeded stuff, at least for this use case. So let's put some code into this. Alright, so first thing, let's start off with the header. So let's see, we have the flashlight header open here, And if you remember when we did the torch, it's going to be very similar to this. Um, so the headers for the flashlight, just gonna bring these in. We're actually going to include the torch header because I believe it's using some of the renderer stuff in here and the shader, and so we only need to include that. And if you remember from last time, we had this namespace torch, which was we were able to access some of the the lighting GI stuff in these enums, the minimum spec for casting shadows. So for the flashlight, we have the exact same thing, only it's going to be a namespace of flashlight. So these are kind of separate, and we can, for example, for the flashlight, we can probably have the minimum spec be medium or high. It's depending on how you want to set things up, and the same for the global illumination mode. All right. So now that we have the names, these enums in place, let's go ahead and actually create our class. Let's start down here, and just like before, let me just copy some of this stuff. Because most of this stuff, the reason I'm doing this is just that it's boilerplate, and I don't want to, extend the length of this video of me just typing in these things. Okay, so we have this, and so we're building our component. So with that said, let's start off with just your basic entity component work, as well as the some that's related to this EI entity component previewer, which is the render. And let's get this in. So these are going to be, I've made all of these public. So there they are. So as you can see, just like I mentioned, we have initialized process events. So we've seen this plenty of times, and rendered. Okay, so the other few things that I'm going to bring in, just like we did for the torch, and let me just scroll down to that. You'll notice that we have an S option struct, an X color, shadows, animations. So the flashlight has pretty much the identical stuff, only with maybe a couple of different things in there, because since it's a projector light, it needs some projector options. So let me copy those in as well, along with the constructor and destructor, which are just the default implementations. So I'm gonna place these right under here. So let's go through them real quick. So as before, if you remember from Torch, we had, let's see where we're at, yeah, right here. So we had the S options, which has your typical settings for this: attenuation, bulb size, if it's going to ignore vis areas, volumetric fog, ambient light, the GI mode, which currently it's set to disabled. Then we have the color. That's pretty straightforward with your diffuse multiplier, your actual color. The shadows, if it's going to cast them, upon build, we're always going to set them to always. And the S animations, let me just place these in order. So they're if you do look at the code repo, it might make it easier to follow if you have them side by side. And something that's different, or it's more pertaining to the projector light, is this projector options, which you'll notice that has, if you've ever played around with adding a projector light into Cryengine, you'll notice that, or into any engine for that matter, you notice that we have we can set a texture path, we can set a material path, so that whenever you project the light, you can set it to an alpha of maybe, say, a T, or an X. You can choose choose whatever image for that. And currently I'm setting this to this acid material soft edge, which you can create inside the engine. So now that we have the projector options out of the way, let's copy some of the things. Like we have these functions here. We're going to have to do the same thing for this, just to make lives a little bit simpler on us. So just like before, I'm just going to be doing a quick copy and paste. Alright, so just like in here, you'll notice that we have an enable and a check to see if it's enabled. Don't worry about the red squiggly marks. We're going to go over those once we add the member variables for this class. So you see we have get options just like before, get color parameters, shadow, animation parameters. That's exactly the same as we had in our torch. So once we have that in place, let's do our, if you remember from the torch, we had this void load light, so we can kind of separate some of the light creation functions when we do the initialize. So this one's going to be called void load flashlight. Alright, so now that we have that in place, let's go ahead and create a couple of functions that are going to be used to help us orient the light. Because if you think about it, being a projector light, the torch light was easy, because it casts light no matter what, all directions. But with a projector light, we want to make sure that we're where we're facing, that's where we're shining our flashlight. So in order to do that, what I have here, and I need to give a quick shout out, so to speak, to the channel Music for Life. I think it's PL20. And he was kind enough to instruct me on some of the math for orienting the flashlight. So thanks again for that. All right. So and then so these functions are going to do getting the local translation matrix of this component. So since this is the flashlight is going to be creating it, we're going to create this component. We want to get its local translation matrix, so that way, based on where the player is looking at, we can orient this component. So, and then what we need to do is we're going to set the local orientation, and this takes in a quaternion. I think this is a good how to put it. I know for some users, Cryengine might come across as difficult, and it definitely is. It's a little bit more of a raw type of implementation of things, because the math is pretty much it doesn't aid you as much as some other engines. And on one hand, people have some trouble with that. I mean, on the other hand, I think it might be better for learning some of these things, but then again, it's all up to how everybody looks at it. Okay, so now that we have all the functions in place, let's add our last variables. And just like before, they're pretty similar to what we have in the torch. So let me just indent this properly. So we have to be active, we have a radius. The difference is we have this little clamped angle here, which is the angle of our projector light. So if you remember, and just in Cryengine or any other engines, you can set an angle to your to how wide the spread of the light is. And then just like almost like before, we have the S options, and we have the color, we have the shadows, and we have the animations. The other thing that we added in here is these M projector options, which, if you remember from before, is just related to this, the S projector options. Okay, so now that we have the header out of the way, let's jump into our C++ file. And this is where the things are going to be interesting. It's going to be pretty quick as well, because some of these are identical again with what we have for Torch. So it's going to be just a little bit of copying and pasting. Okay, so first things first, let's include our headers that we need for this. And you got the standard, you got the flashlight header, and I believe these are identical to, to what we had for our torch. Okay, so now that we have that in place, let's start off with, let me just move the header off to the right here. So let's start off, let's see what's the order that we have these in. So we need the initialize. Just like before, if you remember from Torch, and Torch is right here, these are pretty much everything that we need. So jumping back into Flashlight, let's bring in our initialize. So first of all, we're checking to see if this is active, and if it's not, or if it actually, I think this should be, if it's not active, yeah. So if we turn it off, we want to free that slot, and then return. And if it's not, if we do initialize it, we want to load the flashlight. So we'll implement this shortly as we go down the list. Alright, so next thing on the docket is we have the process event and the get event mask. Again, just pretty much boilerplate stuff for this, and also identical to what we had in Torch from last time. Alright, and after this we have the render function. So the render function is actually, this is where the difference is going to come in, because the renderer is going to act pretty different from our regular point light. While there's less code for this, again, this is something that I'm not at the liberty to explain it, because I don't really understand some of this stuff myself. Again, it's a bunch of this renderer type coding, which I'm not very familiar with. So I wish I could be able to tell you, okay, this is doing that and this is doing this, but we'll just take it as is. So we have the render in place, and so again, this code is going to be available on the Git repository. So if you take a look at the description in the video, you will be able to, I'll post the link so you can go and just get the code right out of there. You don't have to pause the video and, okay, let's type this up. Alright, so we have the stuff that's actually going to do kind of the work for us to render the light. And then we go into the enable function, which is, let's see, where do we place that? Right up after our structs, and there it is. So let's add in enable, which again, this is a mirror of what we had for the torch light, for our point light. It's exactly the same. Okay, so now on to loading the flashlight, because it's needed, and we have it right there, so we need to put this in. Okay, so let me just copy this stuff and we'll quickly go through it. This one is a little longer than the load light for our torch, just because it also takes care of a little bit of some other things along the way. And let me save this. So some of the things that it's also doing, and let me just see, maybe did we miss anything? And our flashlight header file, let's see, I get some stuff here for this M animations that is not entirely sure why it's calling it as undefined when I have it here, and I'm including the right header. Load flashlight. That is interesting. Oh, did I spelled it wrong, so my bad. It's with a lowercase l. Okay, there we go. That's much better. Sometimes, copy and pasting is not the best thing, but, gets you across pretty quickly. Okay, so let's go into this. Just like before, we have the CD flashlight or CD light flashlight. One thing to mention is whenever 5.5 is gonna be released, we're gonna do a quick once over for this because there's some changes as far as how this is not going to be called a CD light anymore. It's actually, I think, a S render light. So once 5.5 comes out, I'll do a video on migrating to 5.5 for this project that I'm doing here. So part of it is going to be some of these refactorings. Okay, so just like before in Torch, we had pretty much similar. We have the animations, setting the animation speed, setting the positions. One thing to highlight here is that you'll notice that these flags are actually calling out for a DLF project. So that's kind of a change from our regular point light. All right. Also, one of it is the M light frustum angle, which it's going to take our M angle from here, which we set at 25 degrees, and it's going to actually turn it into a what I believe looks like a float. So then this M near plane, I believe this is just I was never really able to understand what the project near plane really means. I haven't really played with it, but it's one of the options, so I've added it in there. Then again, just setting the light color, the specular multiplier, a couple of the flags for some of our options in the one of our structs. Then just setting the light, casting the shadows. So you'll notice this is again just identical stuff that we had in Torch. The bulb side, the fog, radio lobe, again just the same. One of the things that's different, added to this is the projected texture path. So if you have a texture, you can do it through setting the path for it right here. So once you do that, and the renderer is loading that dynamic texture, let's see what else needs to be highlighted here. Oh, and then once we get to loading the light, and again, so a couple of the options, we had setting the texture path or has a material path. So if you have a material path, which I was actually doing, and I believe I set that right here, if you remember in our struct, I've set a material path to assets, material, soft edge, dot material, because this is going to be a lot easier to set up than trying to dig up a the path to a texture like this one here, which I believe it's not even right. So I'm going to go with setting the material for this, and see that's why I have this called out right here, setting the material path for this. So the material would include our alpha texture, where I was mentioning you can have like an X for your alpha or T, whatever. So and The other thing that I need to highlight here is this was kind of a quirkiness of this projector light. I'm not entirely sure. Hopefully they're going to apply a fix to it. But what I had to do is, well, this was added to begin with, but it wasn't pointing forward for whatever reason. It was still pointing to the side. So I think in the fix that was on the GitHub repo for the Cryengine default components, this was a positive, so it was this was times 0.5 f, so I had to put it at negative 0.5 f to point it straight on the y positive. At least that's what worked for me. Alright, so that is pretty much it that I wanted to highlight in the load flashlight. So that was the load flashlight part. So now let's get into some of the positioning and implementing some of the set material and set texture path functions, because those were, if you remember, let me just make this a little bigger, this a little smaller. So if you remember, for our S projector options, we had the set texture path and set material path. So we need to implement those functions down here. So let's add those in, and just gonna do a quick copy and paste because they're really basic. There's just a setter type function, and if you look at it, we're just setting the texture path to, we have a Z path, and if you look right above where we were setting the texture path, let's see. Actually, I don't believe we were calling it in here because we're just setting the material path. So this is just going to be in place in case you want to change this and actually load a texture directly. So we have the setting the texture path, and then we have them setting the material path, which actually, if you look at it, we're going to set our M material path, which is in our header right here, to be equal to this Z path. So this starts off with this soft edge MTL asset, but if you want to change that to something else, you can do it right here. And at this point, I'm actually just passing in this current value, so you can potentially not even call this, but I have it in place just if you decide to pass in a different, maybe a parameter that's open to schematic, right? So whenever you you start the game, if you set up, whenever your schematic is up and running properly, or not, but up and running, and people can use it, and it's in a stable version, it's not in beta anymore, so to speak. You could potentially just access that value and set its material to something else, depending on maybe parts of your gameplay. You enter a certain area, you want to change that flashlight to be red or something like that. Okay, so which actually gives me an idea for things. Alright, so now that we have the setting the texture path and setting the material path, let's do these two little functions at the end that we were working on to set local and set the orientation and get the local translation matrix. Alright, so first of it is going to be getting the local translation matrix, and I'm just going to paste this at the bottom. And again, it's just a getter. And what it does, it's going to set the is going to get the local translation matrix for our entity. So our entity that holds this this light. All right, so that's our local translation matrix. And now let's put in our setter to set the local orientation. So this just sets the local translation matrix, which is pretty straightforward. We're getting it, and then we're setting it based on where we're looking at, right? So that is pretty much all the functionality that we need for our components. So what do we need to do now? Now we need to go in, and if you remember from last time, I believe it was in player.c++ where we were initializing the attachments. So far we only have our torch. So what we need to add is the flashlight attachment. So in order to do that, let me just also follow along with my test level here and find my initialize attachments. Let's see, initialize attachments. Alright, so in here I'm going to be doing a little bit of typing because this is, I think it's a little bit more important than, and it's not so, it's still pretty similar to this, but I wouldn't call it just as boilerplate as it was. Okay, so getting into this, I'm going to still be doing a little bit of copying and pasting for some of these lines, but just to make things a little quicker. So we're going to start off with our flashlight attachment. So this is going to be P, I just named it flashlight attachment. And we're going to get our attachment, which we're going to name flashlight. I believe that's a good name for our attachment. We're making a quick check to see if it's not null. And then we're going to spawn it. So once we have our sentity spawn params, and we need to spawn our component. And I guess I lied. We did do quite a bit of copying and pasting here because it's right there and it's convenient. Alright, so let's rename this to spawn the torch, and oops, I need a comment. Spawn the flashlight. Alright, so what we need to create here is, first of all, let's actually call this pFlashlight entity. And one thing that we need to add is we need to add this into our header file. So first of all, I'm just going to add this in. So it's going to be pFlashlight component and pFlash entity. So let's go back into our player, and if you remember from last time, we had a component for the torch and an entity for the torch entity. So we're just going to copy these, and let's do a flashlight component pFlashlight, and we'll include the header right away so we don't have any errors, and an entity for pFlashlight entity. Alright, so in order for us to get rid of this, one thing that we need to include is our flashlight. So for the autofill in C++, I'm just hitting Control Space if you're interested and you want to use it. It's pretty useful, I would say. Okay, so we have our headers in here. Let's go back into player.c++. Alright, so in here, this is going to have to be let's see, flashlight component. No, I don't want to search. And one thing that I need to do is actually close these at the end. So this one's going to be C flashlight component. There it is. And let's see, why do we have these errors here for the flashlight component? And let's see, why are we getting this stuff? Flashlight entity. Well, I guess this could be one of the issues here to begin with. Flashlight entity. And my spelling is horrible. There we go, that's much better. And off it goes with the errors. Alright, so now that we have this flashlight entity, One thing that we need to also account for is, I believe this is pretty much everything that we need for this. So now we're just going to need to attach it to our attachment, right? Because we want the flashlight, in our case, to be somewhere maybe on the forehead, or kind of position on the head, kind of like a headlamp. This way, you kind of keep it, at least in my case, I'm keeping it a little simpler because I do not have an animation with a hand extended out to to hold a flashlight, an actual flashlight. So I don't have that just yet. Hopefully I'll be able to get one and use it. But at this point, it's just going to have to be attached to the player's head. All right. So we're spawning. We're creating the component class. Next thing we need is actually, let's just, again, just as before, we're going to copy some of this stuff here, place it right there. Let's get the entity ID, which is going to be, I'm going to call this flashlight ID, and we're going to get the ID from this entity. This way we can bind it to that attachment. And then we have our P flashlight entity attachment. And to that, we're going to set our the flashlight ID to that entity. And add binding. And that should be pretty much it as far as attaching this flashlight to our attachment. But one thing that we need to do is, and let me see if I'm missing anything here. And we'll do a quick test. Add the attachment to the player character and see if we get the flashlight to load. So let me see if I'm missing anything going through my test case here. I think that's looking good right now. So one thing that I want to do is, just like we did, I don't think we did it here, but I'll probably set it to be active. So I'm going to leave it as is. I'm not going to change anything to it. But one thing that we need to do, if you remember from last time, we had to add an action, so a key that we press in order for our flashlight to turn on or off. For our torch, we had it be the T key. So let's just copy this section of code here and add this to be, let's see, hopefully I didn't go too far down. So this is going to be flashlight, just kind of trying to keep things a little bit more separated. First thing that we need to do is let's register this action as I called the other one torch on, so let's call this flashlight on, though it's kind of an on and off type switch. Flashlight on. Always make sure to have the action mode, because if you remember from last time, we didn't have the action mode added to this. So what was happening is, whenever there was any input coming from the keyboard, it would keep kind of flashing on or off. So it wasn't working as expected. Alright, so let's copy this in here, and in this case we have the torch, but we want the P flashlight, flashlight, and how come we can't access that one here? I believe that we named it It should be like this. Oh, there it is. I think I was just trying to put an underscore or something there. That's why it wasn't working. Alright, so let's add this in here and here. So we're turning it off. So let's just make this so that it's flashlight, turn on flashlight, and turn off flashlight. Alright, so one thing that, this is the last thing that we need to change this. So I think calling this as an F for flashlight might do it. I believe we do not have that in use yet, so I think that might be good. Alright, and I believe that is it for now. So let's give this a quick build. Let's see if we have any errors going on. Alright, so everything looks good. Let's start off in our local. I guess it wanted to go off of that. And I thought that I guess this is a good showcase of how to set this to debug through your editor. So if you right click and go to properties and go to debugging, and it's actually it is set up to sandbox. So oh, maybe it was that it wasn't set up a startup project. Let's take another whack at this. There we go. So sometimes you just need to right click on your solution name and set it as startup project. So let's open our example level and jump into game mode. Let's see what happens if we hit F. Crash. Oh, that's very interesting. So let's see what's going on. This was a null pointer. So why is it complaining about this being a null pointer? Let's take a look and see. So if this is enabled, okay, so we're not really doing anything with the lights. So let's take a look at our player.c++. So in here, I think we should just give a value to p flashlight m underscore be active. The fact that it's this is the flag to say the light is active or not. So let's set this to false, and let's see if this might help with things, because when it's looking at this value is not set to anything probably. So let's see if this helps. Alright, let's open the level, jump into game mode, and same crash. So return be active, and we did set it to false, so I'm wondering why are we getting this crash here. Everything looks fine on this end. Player.c++. Oh, maybe because I'm having a guess, a wild guess. It might be because we haven't added the attachment just yet. So let's try doing that as well, just to eliminate any other potential issues that could be causing this. Alright, so let's go to Tools, Animation, and Character Tool. And I'm just going to bring it right here. And one thing that we need to load is our pants guy. Alright, so we have all the other attachment but the flashlight. So let's go ahead and click on attachments and add. So I'm going to be calling this flashlight. And right now it's placed at the feet. Let's actually place it at the head. I think that might be a good placement. There it is. And we can just adjust it a little bit so it's a little bit more in front. And if you take a look at it, I think that's a pretty good positioning right there. Okay, so now that we have the flashlight in place, let's save this. And let's see if we get this issue again. I kind of think that we might. Right, so why do we get this thing happening here? Let's see what's going on. Do a little bit of troubleshooting here. So it is complaining about this be active value. That is really interesting why it's causing it. Huh, what could be causing that? Let's see. One thing that I do want to take a look at is, let's see, where's our flashlight.cpp? Right there. It's initializing, load flashlight. Let's take a look at player. So let's take a look and see if we can debug this real quick. Let's see first of all if we do get a correct pointer to this. Maybe because one of the things is we probably also need to do a check on this whenever we run things. So let's fire this thing up. Alright, so this one is initialized to null, which is not what we were hoping for. So why is it doing that? Let's see if whenever we jump into game mode, if oh, I think I know what this issue is. I think I might know what this is happening about. So let me try and stop this and not running in debug mode and see if that might fix. Because I know there's some issues with projector lights. When you set them to cast shadows and you have, oops, that was in the right one. Okay, so let's take a look at our stream example. I know there's an issue with at least 5.4. I know it's fixed in 5.5, but there's an issue with trying to create a shadow casting projector light when you have total illumination or global illumination on. So first of all, let's I'm just going to go ahead and I can find that window. There it is. So I'm going to turn off my GI here, which is going to make things look a little bit you know, bright. So in order to get things to be a little darker, I'm just going to add a quick environment probe. So let's add an environment probe here. So that way we can see the light a little better. And I believe that was one of the issues I was running into with the other level, but I was able to show it to you because the GI was off. So apologies about that detour, so to speak. So let's set this up to 500 maybe by 500 by 500, so it encompasses the whole level. So let's do a quick generate for this, and at least we have some darkness going on. So let's see if my my theory is correct. Alright, so there we go. We have turned on off the flashlight. I'm not entirely sure why there's no... Oh, there it is. There is the light, which is pointed awkwardly to the side. So we need to fix that. And it's also weird that it's positioned right. I believe it's positioned where it's supposed to. Oh, well, not. It's actually on your on the left hand. So let's see, why do we have it there? And let's look at the right solution. And well, I believe that's not it. Let me close that out real quick. There we go. So we are getting the interface by name, and that's flashlight, and that's torch. So, but are we? And I believe we are using the right one. Oh, so this was the issue because I was attaching it. I was adding the binding to the torch attachment and not the flashlight attachment. So there we go. Like I said, sometimes copying and pasting works. Sometimes, you know, you might not be paying too much attention. So let's try this out and see if we can get it to face forward. And okay, so we have the little, we can probably remove that breakpoint, jump into game mode, turn on flashlight, and there it is. So we have a light casting forward, but it's only casting forward. If you look up and down, it's not really, it's not really doing anything. So if you were in a in a first-person version of this, you would not be able to. If you look at the ground, the light will still be casting forward. So let's fix that. All right. So in order to do that, now that we have these things in place, let's go into our player.c++, and I think a good place to put this, at least for now, is going to be in the update look direction request. So if we look at that update direction look request, one of the reasons I've chosen this is because we're going to make use of this mlook orientation. So and it's a pretty short function, so it's going to work pretty good with keeping things tidy. Okay, so a couple of things that we need to account for. First of all, we don't want to set the orientation of this every single frame if the flashlight is off. So first of all, let's go ahead and check for p flashlight to see if it's enabled. Is enabled. So if it is enabled, then we're going to do our little math. Okay, so first thing that we need to check for is we need to get the look of where the player is looking at. So we need to get a vector from that. So this is going to be a vec3 of direction. So let's call this direction. Again, thank you, Music for Light, for this this math that you helped me out with. That was a good, that was a great help. So, and look orientation, and in order to get, this is actually kind of the the vector pointing forward from your kind of from your face, if you think of it. So if you look up, it's going to be pointing up to the side and so on. And from that, we're just going to get the column 1. This is what we need out of it. Okay, so once we get that, the next thing we need to get is our current flashlight orientation, because if you think of it, this is a component that's part of this flashlight entity. So we need to orient the component based on where we're looking at. So in order to do that, this is going to be, we need to get this is going to be a quaternion, and we're going to name it current flashlight orientation. And this is going to be, the way we create one is just say quat, and it's going to be p flashlight. So we're going to get the local translation matrix, which, if you remember, we've implemented it in our component. So once we get the local translation matrix, we also need to create some angles. So this is going to be an ang3, and this was named current. So the current angles of it, and this is going to be equal to, we're going to get the angles from the camera. So see camera, if you're looking right above, this is pretty much similar to this. So and we could have probably used that, but I just wanted to highlight it a little bit because, like I said, sometimes the math on Cryengine could be pretty daunting just because it's a little bit more of a pure type math. So we have the current, so see camera, and create angles YPR, and from this one we need to create it's going to be a matrix 3x3, and like I said, I think we could have used this one, but I'm just going to create a new one just for this scope. So matrix 3x3, and this is going to be current flashlight orientation. And actually, I believe that, no, this is actually different. My apologies. It's different because this is going to be, this is the look orientation, so where your eyes are looking, but this is the orientation of, or the angles of your, if you look of your flashlight component, because this is where this is being created. Alright, so once we have that, we need to create a quad for the target orientation. Flashlight orientation, and this is going to be also a quaternion, and it's actually going to be, let's see, we're going to create a rotation, and this is going to use our look orientation, so because that's the target, so wherever we look at, that's the target where we want our flashlight to be pointed at. Okay, so we have the target flashlight orientation, and now we also need, just like before, we have these angles for the current, so we're going to need an angle for the target. So I'm just going to quickly copy this from here, and it's actually going to be almost identical. So it's going to be target, and we're going to get the target flashlight orientation. So now that we have all these elements in place, we just need to point the flashlight. But one thing, the thing that we need to do is the angle, the target angle, target dot x. Since this is binded to your head, we're going to need to be YPR current dot x. YPR target dot z equals dot z. And one thing that I ran into while doing this is that on the y-axis I had to multiply this by -1 because when I was looking at up the target, the light was actually pointing down, and I wasn't entirely sure why this was happening. -1F. Okay, so now that we have the angles in place, we can actually create the target flashlight orientation from the target. So this is going to be a quads again of C camera, just like we had before. Let's see, right here. So C camera, create orientation YPR, and this time we're going to pass in the target. Okay, so once we have those values, we just need to apply it to the flashlight. So P flashlight, set local orientation, and this is going to be our target flashlight orientation. So yes, definitely, this map is a little bit daunting. It is to me as well. I'm getting a better feel for it the more I practice with it. But again, it's something that it's definitely not easy or the easiest thing to work with. But hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of if you have this this entity attached to a bone and you want to orient it a certain way. Hopefully this kind of segues you towards that. Okay, so let's give this a quick build and see what we get. Hopefully we get the our headlamp to point where we're looking at. Let's open the example, jump into game mode, and there we go. That's actually pretty nice. Of course, it's going to be once it's pointed down, it's going to be even nicer if the character is, you know, slightly to the side of the camera and not like right in front of the light. And it's going to make even more sense if it's, for example, you know, first person position, you know, your camera. So right now, you know, we can look around and the light is going to be following where we're looking at. So that is pretty much it, and I believe we managed to keep this under an hour. One thing that I do need to do is actually disable, because I believe that flashlight is still there upon exiting game mode. So part of part 3 for next week, we'll go over some of the, you know, kind of refining this a little bit, and also, if you remember from one of the videos that I my test case was where the player had a little torch, like one of those propane torches, and they had a particle effect, and you know, kind of making it a little nicer, as well as that animation of holding that torch up. So we'll go over setting up those states. One thing that I probably won't go over, since, you know, it's been done in previous videos, is creating the blend space for the walking with torch animation and importing those animations. Those are just, I would call it a little bit more of a grunt type work, so it's not necessarily, we don't need to fill a, you know, part of the video with that. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for stopping by. Hopefully this helps some folks out. Like I said, I'll push the changes to the repository to GitHub, so you guys can grab the code. And yeah, have a great Sunday, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.